Hi there and welcome back to another episode of The Art of Business English. This is Andrew Ambrosius here again for another interesting and useful lesson. Today, I really want to share some tips with you on how you can improve your international business communication. So, are you the type of person who has to attend meetings with lots of people from different countries? Or do you have to use English as your common language? Or do you often find yourself talking to non-natives in English? Well, if this sounds like you, then today you're going to love my tips. Do you know that most conversations in business English situations today occur between non-natives? That's right. Most international groups are using English as the common language, yet most of them are non-native English speakers. So how does this affect me or you? Well, if you're a non-native speaker and you find yourself talking to other non-native speakers, then you should find it easier to communicate, okay? But if you're talking to if you're talking to native speakers of English, then you may find it more difficult, okay? So in this episode, we're going to be looking at what you can do to help make yourself better understood and also give you some tips on how you can make others, especially native people, communicate more clearly. So in this episode, we're going to be covering the following: how to promote better communication, the importance of good pronunciation, why speaking fast can be a negative thing, using synonyms to help or to simplify expressions, avoiding abbreviations, how you can encourage native people to speak more clearly, and finally, some common vocabulary and expressions from this episode. So let's get started. So how to promote better communication? Well, what are some of the key rules to follow to help promote better communication? Let's take a look then at them so we are aware, okay? So being aware of these guidelines will help you to be more conscious when you are communicating. What I often find is that in order for people to sound more native and or intelligent, they try and use fancy words or terms that they think will make them look better. In international business communication situations, this can often work against you, okay? It's true that sounding articulate and intelligent is important. It helps you to gain more respect and people will believe in someone who they think knows what they're talking about. However, this does mean that we should use this does not mean, that we should use complex language and idiomatic expressions to demonstrate our intelligence, okay? So the first rule then is to speak clearly and concisely. You should also moderate the type of language that you use to fit your audience. So if you notice within the first 2 or 3 minutes of a meeting or a conversation that the people you're talking to are quite good at English, then you can obviously use more advanced language. If you see that the person you're talking to has a low English level, then you should modify your vocabulary to help them better understand, okay? So naturally, if you're a non-native speaker of English, this will be something that you can sympathize with. This is something that native speakers of English don't really understand, and they need to be trained in better communication skills in international business. And we will discuss this later in the episode. However, I would like to point out that this can be an incredibly frustrating part of doing business with native speakers of English. The fact that they assume that everyone can speak English beggars belief, and that is why I always encourage my students to have the courage to call them out and make sure they modify their language to facilitate communication, okay? So the importance of good pronunciation. So moving on, the second thing that we really need to focus on is using correct pronunciation. It's incredibly important. People don't really appreciate how important this is, and there are a number of reasons why, and I'm going to share them with you now. But firstly, when you pronounce words poorly in English or any language for that matter, this has a negative effect on communication. What actually happens is that the listener has to strain, really concentrate to understand what you're actually telling them. And this can quickly lead to communication breakdown, especially if the person you're trying to talk to loses patience or can't be bothered to make the effort to understand you. So, it can be very difficult to understand someone who has poor pronunciation, especially in English. Why, you may ask? Well, put simply, when we pronounce words in Spanish, we generally pronounce all the letters of a word. So, for example, quiero, Q-U-I-E-R-O, quiero, seems quite simple. English, on the other hand, has different pronunciation depending on the word and the position of letters within a word, etc., etc. There are many rules. So with English, you may think that you are pronouncing a word well when in fact it sounds nothing like it should. Now, I'm going to demonstrate the importance of pronunciation to you by poorly pronouncing a number of Spanish words. So take a listen to this list. Quiero, Inica, trabaja. Do you know what the words are? They are quiero, so quiero, because, in English you'd say Q-U. Quiero, or want. Iniciar, so iniciar. If you don't put the th, it sounds like iniciar. Or initiate, so that's initiate. And trabajar, if you don't put jar, it sounds like trabajar, or work. So in English. So here we can see how difficult it is to understand. Now imagine these words and the poor pronunciation in whole sentences. So right, how to use your voice is the next part of the episode. Let's move on to the next tip then. So some people think that if they speak fast, they will sound more native. This couldn't be further from the truth. I can speak Spanish quite well, and sometimes I will say something to my friends and they won't understand me, and that's because I'm speaking too fast. And this is also true for English. I often speak quite fast, and even native people can struggle to understand me. So furthermore, when we are nervous, we speak faster, and this really shows. So if we combine that with nervous hand gestures, it can really impact negatively on our confidence and overall communication. So another thing that happens when we are nervous is that we can also speak quietly. We don't feel confident, so we don't vocalize what we're trying to say. Again, we should be aware of this when we feel nervous, and speak slower, and try to use intonation, to improve clarity. Finally, we can impact negatively on overall clarity by putting our hand over or near our mouth, or by looking down when we're talking. All of these factors will generally work against you when you're trying to communicate effectively. So keep these things in mind. And, the golden rule then is that, one, we need to pronounce and vocalize our words well. And secondly, we need to speak at a moderate speed. Obviously, we don't want to speak too slowly, otherwise we may annoy people and sound a bit condescending, like you're talking to a child. Now, the next part is word choice, So this is let's look at our third tip, which is word choice, as I said. And, we need to be aware of the type of words that we have used. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate to you what I mean by actually going back and looking at some of the words that I've used in this episode. So we often use simple synonyms of more complex words, and these help make it easier for someone with less English level to better understand. So let's consider the words from this episode. The first one is take a look at. Okay, take a look at. And the simplified form of take a look at would be to look at. Okay, in order to. So the simplified form of in order to would be to. To point out. So to point out, and the simplified form would be to say. Beggar's belief. So the more complex form of this, so the complex form of beggar's belief would be difficult to understand or difficult to comprehend. To call someone out. To call someone out is to challenge them. Incredibly important would be, the simplified form would be very important. A number of. The simplified form would be some or several. Actually happens. The simplified form would be happens. To make the effort. The simplified form of this would be to try. To be aware of. The simplified form would be conscious of. So, what you can see here is that there are many phrasal verbs and fixed expressions, and these sound great, but in many cases there is a simpler way of saying the same thing. So remember, our objective is to promote understanding and not to sound more native. We have a duty to make our listener understand what we are trying to communicate to them, and not the other way round. Many people fail to remember this. They think people should understand them, when in fact we need to make people understand us. So avoiding abbreviations is the next one. Let's take a quick look at how we can avoid using abbreviations to improve communication and understanding. So abbreviations are very popular in business, and that's because they can help native people save time and include a lot of information or context in a couple of letters. This is all good and well if you're working with a team or in a sector where everyone generally knows these terms. Unfortunately, this does not help with communication, and as such should be avoided. So for example, some common abbreviations that people can find confusing are COB, which is close of business, FTE, full-time employee, IMO, in my opinion, OOO, out of office, TOS, terms of service, and CPA, cost per action. So this is again a very short list, and obviously there are many more. However, the point I'm trying to make is that you don't need to use abbreviations to sound native or fancy. Your objective is to help people understand and make them feel confident and comfortable. So let's now look at how to encourage people to speak more clearly. So I'd like to give you some tips on how you can do that, okay? And these tips will most probably be useful when you are working with native people, okay? So the name of the game here is to clarify or get an idea repeated to you. And so let's first look at some expressions to show you don't understand, okay? And to ask the speaker to speak a bit slower. I'm afraid, but I don't really understand you. Can you speak a bit slower and clearer? I'm afraid I don't follow you. So, I'm afraid I don't follow you. Would you mind speaking a bit slower? Can I just stop you there? I'm not a native speaker, but I will be able to follow you if you speak a bit simpler. Sorry, do you speak Spanish? Oh, you don't. No problem. Even though my English is pretty good, I'm having trouble understanding you. So now let's look at some expressions for clarifying what we think we hear. So in this last one, you can see I've said, do you speak Spanish? I think Spanish speakers need to remember that, they are making the effort because they are speaking English. A native person, it just assumes that we all speak English. And this is a problem because they don't speak Spanish. So you can just turn the situation around and make the native person feel a bit bad for not speaking Spanish to you. And that way, they will feel like they need to make more of an effort to help you understand. Okay, so let's now look at some expressions for clarifying what we think we hear. I'm sorry, did you say 50 or 15? When you said onboarding, did you mean signing up new members? I think you just said that we need to do more analysis. Am I correct? Am I correct in thinking that what you are trying to say is we need to invest more time in this project? So you can see here we are not saying we don't understand. We're trying to clarify what we think we have understood, which is much better for you as a speaker because it will make you a bit more confident as opposed to just saying, I don't understand. Could you please repeat that? Which is not the best thing to say. You should always try and clarify because it shows and demonstrates that you do understand, but you're just having a bit of difficulty with one or two of the points, okay? Now let's look at some expressions and vocabulary from this lesson, okay? Now that we've covered all of the interesting parts from the episode, we can take a look at some of the most interesting vocabulary and expressions from this lesson. So the first one to take a look at, the translation here is echar un vistazo, and in order to is para, fancy is elaborado, to work against you is ser contraproducente, articulate is elocuente, to point out, remarcar, beggars belief, absolutamente increíble, to call someone out, desafiar, to strain, esforzarse, communication breakdown, rotura en la comunicación, couldn't be further from the truth, lejos de la verdad, onboarding, inducción. Well, there you have it, my friends. A very detailed and highly useful episode for you today. Now remember to keep sending me through your questions, okay? I'm really looking forward to those and your doubts so I can prepare some episodes directed at meeting those needs. And as always, make sure you head over to www.theartofbusinessenglish.com to get signed up for your free month of the AOBE Premium membership. Remember, you get access to the transcripts, the quizzes, forum, and weekly coaching sessions live with me and my team. So if you've enjoyed this episode, then please also give me a 5-star review on iTunes and share this episode with your friends and colleagues. And as always, I look forward to having you back again next week for another episode of The Art of Business English. Till then, guys, take care. Have a great week. Bye for now.